Welcome back. Well, as I said at the outset, there's been quite a bit going on in the education sector recently on the government side. We've had the budget changes that were announced. Still, the Gonski funding is an issue. On the weekend, Education Minister Christopher Pyne released the National Curriculum Review with some interesting recommendations. More focus on literacy and numeracy in primary schools, greater emphasis on the Western canon of literature, and more time spent studying Western civilisation in Australia's Judeo-Christian heritage. And just yesterday, the Prime Minister announced the government would trial companies having a greater role in the school system. This could lead to technology and mining companies, even McDonald's, he says, being embraced to bolster science, engineering and maths education. Whole range of issues, as I said, very confusing for everyone following it, but here to try and make sense of it, I'm joined from Melbourne by National Senator Bridget McKenzie. She's a former high school teacher and university lecturer herself, so she knows what she's talking about, and she's current chair of the Senate Standing Committee on Education and Employment. Welcome to the show, Senator McKenzie.
Good evening, Janine. Great to be here.
Well, as I said, it gets a bit confusing. I mean, we've still got the budget changes that were announced. They are quite radical for the education sector. We had the curriculum announcement, and then in an industry policy innovation announcement, competitiveness, yesterday, that also got into the education sector. So let's start with the last one, because that's caused a bit of concern. What is this issue of commercialisation of high schools doing? What is the education sector doing moving into an industry statement?
Well, I think it actually underpins this government's understanding and focus and belief that education actually will drive not only our productivity but our well-being more fully over coming decades. And so when we look at how do we actually ensure that young people particularly have a bright future in our economy and across our society, then we have to make sure they're fully equipped to get a job. Some young people will head out to university, others school's just not for them. And I think that we have to actually ensure that at a very early age they can start to see industry applications for the algebra they're studying in Year 9. And the PTech pilot, based on the school in New York, would actually assist in potentially giving some options to young people around how what they're studying at school links directly to industry and links directly to jobs.
Which sounds good in theory, and we understand, I think the pilot program might be in Geelong and there'll be disadvantaged areas where it could work. But it opens a whole Pandora's box. I mean, a sort of off-the-cuff remark to the Prime Minister yesterday about McDonald's had him say, yeah, well, that'd be fine. With the whole issue of obesity in schools, we saw the issue with the fast food companies having too much influence. Surely having something like McDonald's in schools runs into a raft of problems?
Well, I can think of an absolutely fabulous example of local industry being involved in a secondary state high school, and it's through the Cows Make Careers program, which is a Dairy Australia initiative, which in local high schools where the dairy industry is a key employer and economic driver, young people are learning from a very early time in their schooling about the importance of rearing cattle, good husbandry skills and the benefit that they can make to the local economy. So I don't necessarily buy the line that industry being involved in education is a bad thing. At the end of the day, governments control the curriculum, governments are in control of the school system, and at the end of the day will have the final say on what experiences and knowledge young people are being taught.
See, that's where I see the problem, because if governments have the say, as we've seen, I mean, in theory, again, it's great, but governments do get influenced by other factors when it comes to corporates. We've seen that. For example, the pilot program you're talking about in the US, that was IBM. How could you have some of the big corporate names like that in Australia, the Google, the Apples, those
Murray
companies?
Goulburn.
Well, but those ones we're also cracking down on their tax programs, multinationals. How would you be if you had them involved in a school program and we're also doing that? There's a lot of conflicts of interest here that would have to be managed, wouldn't they? Dairy's benign, but if you're talking straight big overseas commercial companies, who's going to be the one saying, hold on a minute, is this appropriate, and what happens if there's a conflict?
Well, I think that's why it's really important to have a fulsome discussion about how it is actually going to work in our local space. And that's why our government's absolutely committed to discussing how the program will be rolled out with the local jurisdictional regulators and teachers, etc., and government officials in education faculties across the country to make sure that we actually get the settings right to ensure that exactly what we're focused on as a government occurs. Student outcomes are prioritised in every measure that we actually undertake to achieve.
Senator, is this not just a case of spinning the fact that school funding is in a bit of a mess? Nobody knows where Gonski is. You're having trouble getting your budget through. Is this just waving the white flag and saying, look, if we can get corporates to help us out, that's one less problem. We'll get more funds that way?
Not at all. Not at all. The actual funding bucket that this particular pilot program will be drawn out of is a $12 million contribution by the Industry Minister, not the education funding budget, that also goes to a range of initiatives to increase our young people's involvement and immersion in the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and mathematics subjects, and it's drawn directly from Professor Chubb's recommendations in his report on how to actually turn young people on to all the fabulous things they can learn and subsequent job opportunities from science, technology, engineering and mathematics subjects.
There's a really good point. That whole area, innovation is what's driven the US economy. We have a crisis in this country on this area. There's been criticism of your government for cutting back money. Now, you are indeed putting money in. $7.4 million to provide innovative mathematics resources for primary and secondary school teachers. For goodness sake, $7.4 million is not going far, and we've got a bigger crisis in this new tech world, and that's computer programming and computer skills. You've only allocated $3.5 million to give greater exposure to computer coding. These are just drops in the bucket. They're going to have virtually no impact, are they?
Janine, I think the point is that our government is absolutely focused on targeting our resources where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. And you're absolutely right, innovation is the key. We are the lowest nation in the OECD for connection between industry and our researchers, industry and our universities. Only 5% of Australian businesses actually have a relationship with our higher education sector, and that's appalling. That's not actually going to lead to the innovation and productivity gains that we need to be seeing to ensure that we can maintain our standard of living here in this country. And so the competitiveness agenda is about not allowing those relationships to happen by accident, but about being strategic and ensuring that we bring together industry and the researchers so that we commercialise some of the great ideas that our very creative and innovative scientists are developing right now.
Well, I want to go to the rest of the budget issue, the whole sector, where you're going in funding. But I should just say today, the opposition leader, Bill Shorten, has done a little folksy ad. I think it's only showing in North Queensland, where he particularly targets an area he must think you're vulnerable on. We're just going to play a clip from this ad from Bill Shorten.
G'day, I'm Bill Shorten. Why did I get into politics? Simple, because I believe in a fair go for all Australians. So let me tell you straight. If Mr Abbott deregulates university fees, unis can and will charge whatever they want. Now, I've done a lot of listening. Many of you have told me this is a big concern. So Labor will fight to stop Mr Abbott's $100,000 degrees.
OK, obviously he feels passionate, so do you. What do you say to that? He's getting in early with ads already playing.
Yeah, I think Mr Shorten's actually put the cart before the horse there. There is legislation before the Senate. It has come before the committee I chair, and indeed we had 4 days of inquiry last week, hearing from Vice-Chancellors right across the country, hearing from students, not just white grammarians who attend GO8 universities, but indeed from students that attend private colleges, more vocationally focused courses, about the suite of changes that the government seeks to undertake with its reform package.
How confident are you in getting that reform package through? I mean, you're in the Senate. How are the negotiations going? It's gone a bit quiet because we're focusing on the situation in the Middle East, but there's still a lot of things outstanding. Where are we at, even with the budget reform?
Well, my job as chair of that inquiry is actually to produce a report with some recommendations to government based on the information and evidence that we heard. And there were significant concerns across the sector around particularly the interest rate that students would be charged on their HECS or help debt, and indeed the need for a regional structural adjustment package.
Understand
so they're all
they
going to
would
go
have said,
into the mix.
Where are we at the moment with your reforms and the budget negotiations in the Senate? Because that's where it's going to come to on what you get through. It might matter what you get. Your hearings might hear the best ideas, but it's got to get through the Senate. What are you hearing? There was talk maybe of some compromises on the education proposals.
Well, at the end of the day, that will depend on what amendments are brought forward to the Senate when the legislation reaches it. The legislation won't be in the Senate until the report from my committee is handed down, and we're looking to do that on the 27th of October. I think Bill Shorten's claim of $100,000 degree is an absolute furphy. Only one university has come out, and it's the University of WA, saying what they will charge for their degrees. And what we did hear last week was a range of views of how different universities and different higher education providers will price themselves into the market. So it's an absolute furphy to think that every young Australian will be charged $100,000 to do an arts degree. It's simply not true.
Okay, so it sounds like we won't be getting any movement until your report at the end of the month. Let's go to a few other issues. The burqa debate has quietened down this week. Bronwyn Bishop is out of the country. Some of the national centres have been quite vocal. I don't want to raise the debate again. I just want to ask, do you know where we're at, though, with the ban in Parliament House, or what's happening? Have you been told to keep it quiet and keep the focus on Iraq, or do you think it will be sorted out? We'll have to wait till Bronwyn Bishop comes back.
Well, that's up to the presiding officers at the end. They are absolutely in control of what occurs around security issues within Parliament House. So it's up to the Speaker and the President.
Do you have an opinion on it, like some of your colleagues?
I don't have an opinion on it like my national colleagues.
Okay. Now, another area of interest, now you obviously come from a regional area. You owned a gun, I'm not sure if you still do, and you're an advocate, you still do. You're an advocate for responsible gun ownership. There's been a Senate inquiry into gun-related violence, which has showed us there's very little actually reliable data. What is your feeling? Is there going to be any change to gun ownership laws? Where is this inquiry going? Is it just an inquiry to look at it, or are there proposals? What will you be arguing for?
Well, from my end, I think this is another Greens vote-buying exercise for urban areas, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney. We have 1 million Australians who actually appreciate hunting and sporting shooting, or otherwise use firearms as tools of their trade, including farmers. And they are law-abiding citizens. When we look at gun-related violence, what we know from the police statistics, as contested as they are, is that the majority of guns used in those particular incidents aren't stolen from law-abiding gun owners. They're actually illicit guns, and we can only go to the Glocks that came in via a shipping container. So we actually need to be looking at porous borders. The Greens simply want to make it harder for law-abiding citizens to participate in their chosen sport, humanely deal with their stock issues, or indeed participate in the Olympics. For them, any gun is a bad gun. So it's
where do you stand, given that I would think most Australians think the current laws seem to be working? Are you for holding the current laws or relaxing them?
Yes.
You don't want to relax them any further?
There are examples from other countries where they've relaxed law, particularly on long arms, which is a shotgun and 22s, which hasn't actually resulted in an increase in gun violence at all. So I think we could look there, but I think the current laws work well, get the balance right between public safety and our ability to participate in our chosen sport.
So you'd be happy if they did stay where they are at the moment?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no evidence that a change is required under any circumstances, and I think the evidence that we saw over the last 2 days within gun-related violence issues shows that the police forces actually can't get their statistics right, and from their own perspective any gun is a bad gun, so they're actually in a conflict of interest state in terms of also being those that are charged with registering guns. So there might be some recommendations to be made around how we could better administer or make things more compliant, but not in terms of changing the legislative framework.
We have to leave it there. Senator Bridget McKenzie, thank you for your time tonight.
Anytime, Janine.
Thank you very much. And we're going to go to a short break. And when we come back, we'll be going to another senator, this time from the Greens, Lee Rhiannon.